The reason I talk so much about the importance of testing and test, not guess, and all the rest of it is because there's no other way to know if what you're doing is really working. That's the truth. So many people stick to something because it makes sense to them, or because someone they trust told them to, or maybe because they're part of a community and everyone else is doing the same thing. But the truth is, we really have to check in with our body to see what is and isn't working. And the other thing that's true is it isn't always obvious. Often things that make us feel good, or that we think make us feel good, are actually making us worse. And that's why it's so important to get that biofeedback from our bodies through things that are maybe a little bit less subjective than our own feelings in the moment, which is why I am a big fan of biofeedback. I know that a lot of people in the comments, they talk about how blood testing is very expensive and maybe hard to get, and they don't always trust it. And so in this episode, I thought we would talk about other devices, starting with really simple things like a tape measure, going all the way up to very complicated things, which are nonetheless very helpful to help us know how we're actually doing and if what we're doing is actually working or maybe even making us worse.
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I am your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I am here with my co-host, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, Elwyn Robinson. So Elwyn, biofeedback devices. Okay, yes, they can give us some vital and important information, but on the other hand, could they make people more anxious, more, too out there with too much information? And then also, too, the anxiety or other things of constantly checking it, things like that. Could that be causing more stress than they're worth?
That's a great question. The burden of knowledge, right? The famous Garden of Eden story, where by becoming aware, we fell from grace. I think a lot of people do feel that way, and it is true. And so that's something that it is, or it can be true. And so this is something we have to calibrate. I would say, though, let's ask a broader picture. If you are going in the wrong direction and something bad is inevitably going to happen, is it a good idea to be notified that's the case, even though it makes you feel worse being notified that that's the case? And now, obviously, the way I frame that, an NLP practitioner or whatever would say I'm framing that in a very specific way that makes a kind of answer obvious, but I'm not actually trying to, because I know a lot of people, even people who are very impressive in a lot of regards, who, nonetheless, in certain areas at least, have a what I call an ostrich strategy to life, which is basically at some point or about some stuff they'd rather stick their head in the sand and pretend it's not happening than actually address it. Have I ever been guilty of that? Probably, certainly, at some points, but only ever unconsciously. Like if it's consciously brought to my awareness personally, or someone else points it out, I always seek to embrace reality. I always seek to embrace the truth. And so that's a great question. It's it's a much broader and more philosophical question, Chrissy. And that's is it a good idea to know that something is bad? Now, as I said, that's my bias. I understand for some people and in some contexts. So, there's two things. First of all, your psychology, right? For some people, they'd rather not know. They're not always wrong, because for instance, there may be a small to medium risk of something really bad happening. And then those who choose not to know, maybe the bad thing doesn't happen, and then they've saved themselves a lot of turmoil. So sometimes it is wise and correct to not have the information. The problem is the times where you did need to know the information, where the bad thing does happen. And generally it's true that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, to use another ancient saying, that it's much, much, much more easy to prevent something happening than it is to fix it later. And so I'm a big fan of actually finding out. So in terms of calibrating, is it worth it? I guess another thing is like, first of all, your psychology. Second of all, how fragile is your current state? Or to put it differently, how overstimulated is your nervous system already? So if you're in a position of just like on the brink of overwhelm, you're, you frequently actually are overwhelmed, and overwhelmed means basically, that you really can't think clearly anymore, you can't function anymore. Then learning like another problem that you might have at some point may be counterproductive and unhelpful genuinely at that time. It's better to just focus on what's more immediately in front of you and deal with it. So it is a little bit case by case. However, I'm here to help people to optimize their health. I'm here because my mission is to help people to um, find and address the root causes of chronic disease. And so, because that is my mission and my focus, I will encourage people to use the tools that are available to, find out what's going on and what you can do about it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, it's checking in to see where their current state is. Obviously, it's taking that into consideration and knowing that that may cause a little bit of anxiety. But as you said, if you're headed down the wrong road, it's better to be turned around a lot sooner than before you really go off the deep end.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is something to apply to life. And some people really struggle with that and they never really embrace that philosophy. Some people would rather have a comfortable lie than a harsh truth. And in fact, many people. And everyone has the right to make their decision. But then, every decision you make, there's consequences to it. And to make the decision to like ignore potentially vital information, as I said, if you're fortunate, then the problem isn't there or it goes away on its own and then you're glad you ignored it, but the risk is that it doesn't and it becomes an extremely severe problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, biofeedback devices. You mentioned a few in the beginning of the episode in the opener there. So, yeah, from the simplest to the most advanced. So, where would you like to start?
I'll just give a definition. So biofeedback to me, I'm using it in a particular way, maybe not correctly by other people's definition, but basically what I'm talking about is different devices that give you a somewhat objective measurement of what's going on with your body and in your body. And so you could say that blood tests and urine tests and stool tests and that kind of thing are also biofeedback in a way, because it's like a measurement of what's going on in your body, a snapshot of it even at that time. Um, genetic testing, not really. Like the biofeedback, the concept of biofeedback, just to explain it, and there's also neurofeedback, is that by monitoring what's going on in your body at a certain time, you're able to make adjustments. That's the key thing. So genetics wouldn't really come into this category because it is the way it is. Your SNPs don't change. You can change what is expressed and stuff like that, but that's not really biofeedback. But biofeedback is more, oh, I didn't know this was going on in my body, or I wasn't sure this was going on in my body. Now I know I can make changes, measure again. Oh, look, it's changed. It's got better, whatever. So that's the basic concept behind it. Neurofeedback is similar. There's kind of neurofeedback devices where they put all these electrodes on your brain, and then, you do various things. And it says, okay, now, take a deep breath, and you can see like your beta waves, your stress brain waves go down, and maybe your alpha waves, your more relaxed ones go up, and I can see the impact of what I'm doing and what it has in real time, and as a result, I can kind of adjust. I won't be talking about neurofeedback. I was trialing a neurofeedback device recently, but I didn't really like it, so I'm not gonna like feature that. But so maybe I'll do it at some point. But this episode I'll talk about biofeedback. So it's what's going on in your body. So let's start with like really, a few simple ones, but that are really important, and then we'll get into more, other ones. So an example of a biofeedback device that everyone has used without any exception would be a set of scales.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and going from the very simplest of just stepping on and your weights delivered to now there are also the other ones that are giving you your bone mass, your other things. So like there's from the simplest to the advanced as well out there at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's start with just the weight. So, like the simplest set of scales. So that is biofeedback, right? And it's, as you say, sometimes people don't want to know the answer. So, you've been doing this diet, you've been doing the keto diet, you've been fasting, you've been doing the fruitarian diet, or whatever diet you've been doing, intermittent fasting. And then you're like, is it working or not? And one indicator of if it's working is the scales. Now, I say indicator because, scales can be misleading. And that's where the more advanced type of scales have been developed that we can talk about in a second. So, you know, so yeah, with each of these devices, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons. I'm going to talk about how and when to use them. So the pros of it are that it's, barring any fault with the scales, it's an immutable fact. So if your goal was to lose weight and you've done this fitness regime for the last week or whatever it is you've been doing, and you get on those scales and you weigh exactly the same as before or more than before, it's very upsetting. It's probably anxiety promoting, but it's a fact that at least so far it is not really working, right? Um,
Well,
the,
there is
the
a little caveat there, which I know another biofeedback device can come in because sometimes the scale may not change, but changes have been occurring. So there is that area too.
Yeah, well, so that's what I was about to say in the cons. So in the cons, it is only telling you weight. So if your goal is to lose weight and you're measuring your weight and your weight is the same, then you haven't lost weight. However, there is a lot more to health than weight. There is a correlation. Now, for instance, if you are, I don't know, 100 kilos overweight, by, a standard conventional measurement, BMI or whatever, then it is unlikely that you can explain away why that's still okay. But there are people who are in the BMI of overweight and they are just extremely muscly. They have a lot of muscles, for instance. So that's not a foolproof thing. You can have extra weight just because you haven't had a bowel movement recently. That can make a difference. You can have lower weight just because you are dehydrated, you sweat a lot, you haven't drunk water, so that's going to give you a false weight thing. You can weigh more than maybe you should do because of water retention, although that is kind of an indicator of a problem in its own right. But again, it's kind of misleading if you're trying to assess fat levels, if that's the main reason why you're focused on your weight. And yeah, I mean, those are a few examples off the top of my head, but yeah, absolutely, there are things that will skew that. But still, if you're trying to lose weight, then measuring your weight is a smart thing to do. And there is a strong correlation between weight and health, right? This is something that has become even a bit controversial in the last few years because of lobbying by various industries that are trying to make it like okay to be overweight. But the fact remains that being very underweight is not necessarily healthy. And I would actually say from the research I've seen that people who have a little bit of fat on them that maybe is not aesthetically as pleasing to a lot of people are healthier. So I'm not saying you have to be super thin, but probably being the top end of the BMI, if you have a, quote unquote normal level of musculature, if you're not like really, working very hard to put on muscle, or you aren't very genetically gifted with a large amount of muscle, probably being the top end of the BMI is generally the healthiest, especially for women. Women need more body fat than men. But still being, I don't know, double the average BMI or something like that is just going to be unhealthy. So weight means something. But yeah, that's why actually the next one on my list here is a tape measure, because arguably, like if you're measuring fat, probably a better indicator than just the scales would be a tape measure. And there's a couple of different things, and I would encourage anyone who's trying to lose weight because they, feel like they want to lose fat, to use a tape measure and not just a scale, because as you said there, Chrissy, a lot of the time it might be misleading. Like you might be, say you're trying to lose weight by really working out hard in the gym and stuff. You may be putting on muscle, losing fat, the scale says exactly the same, but you feel a lot better, your clothes fit better, all of those kind of things. So using a tape measure is good. Tape measure of the waist is probably the most important of all the measurements. There's a big correlation between waist size and longevity. That's probably because a larger waist is correlated with lots of hormonal imbalances, like probably most famously insulin resistance, which we've talked about a lot, but not only that, leptin resistance, and to some degree cortisol, to some degree estrogen dominance. All of these things that we've talked about before will tend to be reflected in a larger waist. So measuring waist is a little bit tricky, because if you tense your gut, it can be a little bit less. If you kind of breathe in with your belly, you can really balloon it out and make your waist a lot bigger. If you really squeeze it and push it in, you can make your waist a lot thinner. So it's not super exact, unfortunately, because of that. But if you try your best to kind of do it the same each time, it can give you a reasonable indicator. And generally, losing as little as an inch or two off your waist is a really big deal. It shows a really significant impact to health up to a point. And I just want to, emphasize again that thing I said a couple of minutes ago about how generally people who have a little bit of fat on them overall are healthier. They might not live longer. Actually, often the people who live the longest are pretty thin, but they tend to have less health challenges. People who have a little bit of extra fat on them. I've seen that people who are like right at the bottom or below the BMI are much more likely to have a lot of different health issues. I was one of them, and I think the reason why is because your body does use the fat to store toxins in, at least temporarily. And so if you don't have a lot of it, then it's a problem. The most ill I've ever felt, about 5-6 years ago now, was when I was the thinnest. When I had a six pack or whatever, I felt terrible. Now, obviously, you can have a six pack and not feel terrible, but I will say, for men and women, especially women, but for men as well, and I don't want to sound like a one of these people who talks about unrealistic beauty standards, but I think for both men and women, for women looking like a Barbie doll, for men looking like a He-Man doll, it's quite difficult. It takes a lot, and it's not necessarily healthy. And when you talk to a lot of people who either do have those physiques, or more commonly, I was spoken to people who used to, they would tell me that when they had those physiques, they were really ill. It was very difficult to maintain. So what's aesthetically maybe the most pleasing like that, like for men being extremely shredded with, very little body fat, and I guess for women the same, the female equivalent, is like I don't know, would it be a Victoria's Secrets model or something like that? It's having that very low body fat is not necessarily very healthy. It's very hard for most people to maintain, requires a lot of fairly extreme stuff. So there is a limit to it, but generally for the average person with the average waist size, to use that as a biofeedback mechanism. Maybe you're deciding to clean up your diet, you're deciding to clean up your drug use or alcohol intake or whatever, and you want to see if it's working or not, then using a tape measure, or like, can you fit into those jeans now that you couldn't fit into before? That's that is a lot of positive effects, more than just how you look, in terms of what it indicates for your hormonal balance. So I'm a fan of both of those, with the caveats I added there.
No, absolutely. And you bring up really, really great points. One, the specifics of, yes, is it weight? Okay, the scale that you want to lose, then the scale is absolutely what you want to be looking at. But if you're wanting to lose body fat, increase your muscle tone, things like that, then incorporating both the scale and the tape measure are going to be really interdependent, so that you can actually see, wait, what am I losing? Are my clothes a little bit looser now? Are things going the right way? Because even still, when you're losing weight, there is that potential to be losing muscle mass, and fat at the same time. So there's a lot to take into consideration, and as well as we've done other episodes about really configuring, is this best for my metabolism? But like, we're just speaking on the biofeedback bits here and what they're allowing you to perceive as you're making your journey with whatever the biofeedback is representing for you.
Yeah. And we will talk about biofeedback devices for metabolism next, actually, because it is super important. Yeah, just to go back to those scales that you said earlier, like the ones that claim that they tell you your level of visceral fat or
water,
bone density,
exactly,
and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm a big fan of like replicable results, and what I find, and like results based on reality. And what I find is my understanding, and I'm willing to be corrected on this, but it actually took me years to get to this understanding. My understanding of those scales is that they are not very accurate at all, and that they're just based on a calculation. That's why you have to tell them like your age, your height, like these kind of things about yourself. And I discovered this almost by accident because I realized that on one of these scales it had like, you can tell it like if you're an athlete or if you're a normal person. If you're an athlete, it suddenly tells you at a completely different level of muscle mass, completely different level of bone density. I'm like, well, wait a minute, isn't it sending this electrical pulse through you? And it's like, so that's one thing. The other thing is I've used different ones and seen that it gives substantially different readings. And so whenever that's the case, like I do not find it very reliable. I think if you want to know those kind of things, which would be good to know, like something like a DEXA scan from an actual medical place is what's required. So I guess I didn't even clarify, but all the biofeedback devices we're going to talk about in this episode is going to be like things you can easily do at home. So I don't think that actually working out anywhere close to an exact body fat percentage or an exact muscle mass percentage is possible at home. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can put it in the comments on YouTube or Rumble, like telling me, oh, actually, this one actually does work genuinely, and I'll look into it. But that's as far as I've got with it, Chrissy. So I kind of don't bother using those anymore ever since I discovered that at least all the ones that I tried were, again, very consistent and seem to be based off a calculation rather than like fully just on a measurement.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's really good clarification. So yeah, as specific as you want to get. And those DEXA scans are actually really good. I had one not that long ago because, of my age, I'm at 50. I'm like, okay, let me go see where I'm at. And yeah, so it's an indicator, like all these things are, and it can hold up the warning sign or say you're going in the right direction. So yeah, they're important. They really are. And so you mentioned about going into the next one of working on your metabolism. So let's talk about that. What is that biofeedback device?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a reminder for people on this podcast, we believe that a fast metabolism is a good thing because fast metabolism means that your body is producing more energy. And if you were a machine, you could make an argument that slowing down metabolism would reduce like the rate of your body being used up. That's the kind of essentially the philosophy behind the idea that slowing your metabolism is a good idea. But our understanding is that a fast metabolism is a sign of health because a fast metabolism means that there's an abundance of energy for every cell and every system in your body. And that when you look at the healthiest, usually youngest people, they have a fast metabolism, not a slow metabolism that will often degrade with time. And so that we want to go back to that youthful level of metabolism. Another justification for this, I don't know if I've explained in detail before, but I'll just say it quickly, is that we live in a world that is very toxic, is full of toxicity. And so throughout most of our history, at least as far as we understand it, there was a relative lack of nutrition and a relative lack of toxicity. And so because of that, we had the capacity to slow down our metabolism because that means we would need less nutrients. So the reason we're metabolically flexible, the reason we're able to slow down our metabolism, and some of us really have a tendency to do it, is because if there's not much food, when you slow down your metabolism, you need less food. Your body is producing less energy, it needs less food in order to do it. In this day and age, anyone probably watching this video at least, there's an abundance of at least calories available to you. But there's also an abundance of toxins that your body have to deal with. So the faster your metabolism goes, the more that your body needs nutrients and energy, but also the faster it can deal with those toxins. So again, you can make an argument that hundreds of years ago, it might have been more smart and more beneficial to have a slow metabolism more often. But in this day and age, when there is not really a lack of nutrients, you could say some of our food is very nutritionally depleted. Okay, but again, it's really not that expensive to get, nutrients in supplement form or whatever. So getting nutrients is not nearly as much of a problem as getting rid of toxins in this day and age. That's the essential point. So the faster you can get your metabolism to go, the more your body's going to be able to deal with those toxins more quickly. So that's it in a nutshell. Okay, so with the understanding, we want our metabolism to be fast. How can biofeedback help with that? Well, a lot. So the first thing that you want to consider, and I struggle a lot to get even clients to do this, so I imagine a lot of people who have watched this have not done it. I think I took you 6 months of me asking you to do this before you did it, Chrissy. Get yourself a thermometer. So this is I don't know now, camera's automatically zoomed into me, but this is a like mercury type thermometer, but it's not actually mercury. I think it's gallium these days. Mercury is illegal, which is not a bad thing because it's one of those toxins I mentioned a minute ago. This is what it looks like inside. And so it comes with this case thing where this is the type I recommend, where you seal it, and then what happens is you can just easily shake it like that. And you do that because with these type of thermometers, you need the kind of the line to go back down again, and it doesn't just go back down its own, you've got to shake it back down. There are other types that work, it's just that I find this by far the best, because otherwise you've got to like really grab it. And where this is super easy, just hold it like that, and it's done. So you can measure yourself orally, you can measure yourself under the armpit, or you can measure yourself rectally. You have to know that with each of those, it will change what is normal and what is optimal a little bit. I recommend doing it orally. I do not recommend that people do it with the armpit because I just find that they don't do it correctly. Like to really get an armpit reading, that is correct. You have to hold it under your armpit for at least 10 minutes, and you have to like allow no, and when I say it's kind of the tip of the thermometer. So you take the tip, put it in there, and then shut it. But you kind of have to hold it in place and make sure no air gets into there, like it's completely there for about 10 minutes. A lot of people are moving around, they forget, and it just doesn't create the right environment for it to be warm enough, like for it to get a proper reading. So I recommend orally. In orally, you can do it in 5 minutes. It's kind of the same thing. You need to not talk and not open your mouth for a whole 5 minutes. But, you know, a lot of people are doing stuff like staring on their phone for longer than 5 minutes at a time. So you can just combine it with that, right? It's doesn't have to substantially get in the way of your day. And, or, you know, when you're answering emails or whatever it is you're doing. And so, yeah, we've talked about this before in several episodes. I think the common reading these days is about 36 centigrade, which is about 96.8 degrees Fahrenheit. But what's optimal is 37 or 98.6. And so your temperature gives you a really strong indicator of your metabolism and of your thyroid function. In fact, I personally have come to the conclusion that it's a better indicator. It's certainly a better indicator of your metabolism than doing thyroid tests, because your temperature, you know, is the ultimate expression of your metabolism. But I'd even say it's a better indication of your thyroid function than doing the thyroid lab tests. I'm not against lab tests in general, as you probably know if you know my work. I'm generally a fan. But for this, like the free T3 is the only thyroid marker that I really think is relevant, and the reverse T3 if it's raised, although most people don't test that, and the TSH if it's raised, but it often isn't, even when there's a problem. So, you know, really just getting a thermometer like this that costs, you know, $5 to $10 is more reliable than those far more expensive tests, and you can reuse it again and again. And you can check yourself on a day-to-day basis. So this is something that I got into, actually not so much as a result of Ray Peat's work, although a lot of people are into it as a result of Ray Peat's work, which is great. Broder Barnes was kind of the early, sounded the early warning bells about how common hypothyroidism was. He talked about thermometer, for instance. But I really got into it after reading Wilson's Temperature Syndrome, by Denis Wilson, who we did an episode on. And basically what he talked about is that when you get stressed, your body starts turning your active thyroid hormone into an inactive type of thyroid hormone, just to keep it simple, and then your temperature goes down. And so I started observing the correlation between my temperature and how I felt. And and not just with me, with clients and also with my wife. And I was shocked to find how extremely accurate it was. How almost always, if you're starting to feel tired, if you're starting to feel run down, if you're starting to feel stressed, or if you're well into those things, your temperature will drop. And is it possible to feel terrible and be 37 degrees or 98.6? I'm sure it is, but I rarely see it. Like, and when I say terrible, I mean like, even let's say you feel hot and bothered and aggravated and irritated, and you're like, well, surely I'm not cold in that case. So when actually, from what I've observed, even in those cases, people, their temperature tends to be low, if anything. Like when people are bang on 37 or 98.6, what I've seen is there's a very strong correlation with feeling relaxed and energized at the same time, which is that golden combination, which is always difficult to pull off. And then also happy. And I'm not saying that being at a certain temperature makes you relaxed, energized, and happy, but I'm saying being unwell in some way reduces your temperature, which then means you're not both relaxed and energized and happy. And so again, it's biofeedback, right? You may just be thinking, oh, I'm having a bad day because this person says this, or because I need to do this, or because of I've got pain in my ankle, or whatever it might be. But then you check your temperature and you're, and And the great thing about biofeedback is it works both ways. So meaning, yes, your temperature is probably lowered because of stress or because you haven't slept enough or something like that, some kind of toxic insult I've seen as well. But you can make yourself feel a lot better if you get your temperature back up.
Yeah, and we've done some episodes on how to support that, but can you give people just a quick rundown here about how they may be able to do that?
Yeah, so we just said, it's caused by lack of sleep, stress, something toxic, or, even let's say if you take something that's not innately toxic, but your body has a allergic reaction to it, any of those kind of things, those all tend to reduce the temperature. So like identifying that cause and resolving it, if it's lack of sleep, catching up on your sleep, all of that kind of stuff. But on top of that, if you want and if you're able, also to support the thyroid. And, we talked in the episode on Wilson's temperature syndrome, really gives the full guide on that. But giving your body extra T3 if and when it needs it to counteract that stress is probably the simplest, most effective cheat in most cases. I would say not in all cases. I always see the exceptions, and I've met some people where I've only met one person where it just didn't help. Usually it helps, but it might not be everything. And that's because there is more to metabolism than just thyroid, even though thyroid is the primary thing. So usually people are missing some other nutrient, which is stopping them getting to a temperature where they feel genuinely good, or they have high levels of some toxin, which again is getting in the way of the mitochondrial metabolic energy production, which is stopping them feeling fully good. Can be other stuff, can be a viral infection or whatever, but those are the most common things I see. And so again, addressing those things, but the how is probably another episode. The point of this is to say,
Yeah.
like, this is how you monitor to see what's going on and to see that it's not all in your head. And as I say, it's counterintuitive. Like sometimes you might feel a little bit cold in your body, but otherwise you feel happy. You measure and you're 37 or 98.6. Other times, as I say, you might feel all hot and bothered. Maybe you've been, stressing in a warm environment or whatever, and you think that the problem is if anything, you're hot and bothered and agitated, and you measure and you're 36.4 or 97.6 or whatever the hell it is. It's like, it's not intuitive. That's the point. If you were able to check in with your body yourself and it was reliable, the thermometer would be pointless. The reason I'm recommending the thermometer is because the way you subjectively feel is often not actually accurate. And so if I were to say, subjectively feeling warm correlates with feeling happy and energized and relaxed, you'd be able to think of all kinds of times when that wasn't the case, because it wasn't, I'm sure. But if you base it on real objective like measurement, like oral temperature, then you'll find. Now, having said that, just to remind people, I said I'd tell people when to do this. So if you do it first thing in the morning, you should be, a few points lower, like maybe 36.6 centigrade, 97.8 Fahrenheit. When I say 37, I'm talking about really the middle of the day, like 3-4 hours after waking up till about 3-4 hours before going to bed. That's when the metabolism should peak. So that's when you should be that peak temperature. So don't be alarmed if you only remember to do this first thing in the morning or last thing at night that it's lower. That's fine. It's meant to be lower. That's the yin and the yang. The yangest part of the day, the highest energy part of the day is the middle of the day. The lowest energy part of the day should be the middle of when you're asleep. And so your temperature is meant to be lower then. Your metabolism is meant to be lower then.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, it's one of those things that, to be fair, I mean, I've always known, 98.6, I'll go by that, is, for me, it's recommended, but I never understood, especially when you had me start taking my temperature. I was like, oh yeah, I'm more like 97 point whatever. And I was like, sure, that's fine. It's like, actually, no, when you brought it to my attention, it's like, no, there's some work to do here, so it's like, okay. And that's where, it's pretty supportive, especially if you're realizing, okay, maybe there is the thyroid thing. Maybe I need to do that. Maybe I need to look at, or maybe it's my sleep, because that's also something that I've struggled with. So let me look at these patterns and see what I can identify that can support me to get it to where I want it to go to.
And did you notice the correlation between when your temperature was lower and like stress or feeling worse in some way?
Because I'm so focused on stress, sometimes I don't, really listen. But I would say yes. I'd say now that I'm paying more attention, I can see when I'm in my higher level states of stress, my temperature is lower.
Okay, and we'll talk about how you're more aware recently with
Yes,
at
exactly.
the culmination of the episode. Okay, um, so yeah, another thing that's really simple then, and also related to metabolism, is your heart rate. And so your heart rate is something that you can measure just with a stopwatch, and you can put your fingers on your pulse. You can find your pulse somewhere in your wrist, just like your doctor would, and you can get a stopwatch and you can just measure like 30 seconds and count how many beats you feel in those 30 seconds. Couple of caveats for that. I said, oh, actually, let me go back to the thermometer for a second. The one other thing is, so other than doing it in the middle of the day to get more of a true reading for metabolism, the other thing would be that meals may well shift your temperature by at least a few decimal places. And so it's ideal to do it like maybe half an hour to an hour before a meal and half an hour to an hour after a meal. Why? Well, the meal could have an impact in two directions. If you are relatively healthy, then the way it should be, although it shouldn't be very extreme, but a little bit, is that your metabolism will go down a little bit um, if you haven't eaten for quite a few hours, just because your body is running a little bit low on energy. I said only a little bit because the better your adrenals function, the more they should keep that very steady. But still, like if you're eating meals rather than snacking all day, like I recommend, like at the tail end of having been a while since that last meal, your energy should dip a little bit, maybe zero point 0.1 or something like that. Um, but if you, and then after a meal, the opposite's true. You should feel a little bit warmer because your body now has fuel. It's a bit like, metabolism is often symbolized like a fire in a fireplace kind of thing. And obviously, if you haven't fed it any fuel for a while, if you haven't fed it any wood or coal or whatever, then you'd expect the fire to be dampening down a little bit. And when you put a load more fuel on it, you'd expect it to be picking up again. But here is the exception. For those who've actually had to deal with fires and stoves and all that kind of stuff, like a wood burning stove, you also know that if you take a wood burning stove and you just dump a huge amount of coal on top of it, you can almost kind of put the fire out with that coal. Like you got to kind of do it correctly. And ditto, the way some people eat, they may actually find their temperature is higher before they eat and lower after they eat. And then what that indicates to me is that you're running on stress and the stress is raising your metabolism. You're kind of already, you've run out of fuel from food. And so your body is going into, burning glycogen and all of that kind of stuff. It has to raise cortisol and adrenaline to do that. So your temperature might be up before you eat, and then after you eat, your temperature goes down. So that's a sign that you've probably overloaded your digestive system in the same way you might pour too much coal on top of a fire that's already not burning very brightly in a stove, and it just kind of suppresses the fire. And so that's a sign that you're not eating well, or that your digestive fire, to use a kind of Eastern terminology, is not very strong. On a Western sense, to make it scientific, like maybe your stomach acid is not sufficient, maybe your bile production is not sufficient. And so when you're eating, it's kind of actually slowing your metabolism down. Or we could say the fault is not in the eating, but just that your metabolism is slow in general, and that it's artificially raised by stress chemicals when you haven't eaten for a while, and then it goes back down to what it really is when you eat. So those would be two different ways of interpreting that phenomenon. So yeah, ideally with a thermometer, you're measuring like before and after eating at least some of the time.
Yeah, so that's a really great indication. I mean, that's the other thing you did mention too to me, so I could identify, actually, am I in a stress state or am I in a really good optimal state? So that's a great indicator as well.
Absolutely. I'll be honest, for me, usually my temperature goes down a point or two after eating. It's like, I was running on stress again. Okay. So yeah, heart rate. So heart rate is not as good an indicator of metabolism for the reasons I just talked about, which is actually what kind of reminded me of it. So heart rate can, but is not always raised by stress chemicals. So now generally, unless you're talking about exercise performance, which is a whole different thing, what you want to be measuring, certainly when it comes to metabolism, is resting heart rate. So the first thing is, in the same way, I hope it's clear, but I'll just say it actually, you shouldn't be trying to measure your temperature while you're running around on the go. You should be doing it sitting or lying down. It's the same with the heart rate. So with a heart rate, whether you want to measure it yourself manually or with a heart rate monitor, which I'll show you in a sec, it's you want to make sure that you are sitting down and you have been sitting down for at least 5 minutes. Same with blood pressure, which we're going to be talking about next. So I'm a fan of these kind of things. This, an oximeter, it says. It's you might recognize it from, hospitals have them. You put them on, clip them on your fingers like this. They literally, again, cost $5 to $10. They last years. This is a very low investment thing. And it measures your specific oxygen, which we'll talk about in a second, but it also just measures your heart rate, and you can just use it to measure your heart rate rather than having to kind of count and, how many seconds was it again? And, I've lost track. It just makes it easy. Caveat for this, first of all, you need to be both sitting and resting, and second of all, not wave your fingers around like I'm doing now. You want to rest your hand, and also don't look at it immediately after you've put it on like I just did and go, oh my God, 103. Let it settle for at least a minute before you look at it. Otherwise, it might have that effect that Chrissy talked about at the beginning of you get a high rating, you panic because your heart rate's so high, but it wasn't even real. It's just because it takes a few seconds to calibrate. So put it on, wait a few seconds, wait a minute, I would say, then have a look at it, have a look at your heart rate. So your heart rate does reflect your metabolism, just like temperature does. You will tend to find that they correlate most of the time. As your heart rate goes up, your temperature goes up, and vice versa. Not all the time, but most of the time. So why might they not correlate? The most common thing I see is that the heart rate goes up and the temperature does not. And to me, that's a classic sign of stress. So the thing that's slightly confusing about all this, because I know it might sound like I just said the opposite, with some people, when they're stressed, their temperature goes up, and with some people, when they're stressed, their temperature goes down. My theory on this, I have not seen it validated, but I'm 80% sure, is that cortisol will make the temperature go up and adrenaline will make the temperature go down. And while everyone has both, some people tend to go more cortisol, some people tend to go more adrenaline. And so, yeah, I think, and this is... they talk about this with adrenal fatigue and stuff, like functional medicine practitioners will measure cortisol throughout the day. And if your cortisol is never that high, then they'll tell you, it's because your adrenals are fatigued. But they're not measuring adrenaline. My understanding is that the adrenaline is still high, whereas the cortisol is not, which is why when people take an adrenal formula and they don't take an adrenal cortex, they have adrenal medulla. So the cortex part of the adrenal gland contains more cortisol, the medulla contains more adrenaline. I think that's the way it is. So when they take the medulla, they actually feel worse because they're having even more adrenaline. Whereas if they take the cortex, they feel better because they're having more of the cortisol. So anyway, that's my theory on it. But for whatever reason, some people get warmer when they're stressed. Some people do not. Now, honestly, also, some people's heart rate goes up when they're stressed. Some people it doesn't, because confusingly, the stress in some people shifts the T3 into reverse T3, or the active thyroid hormone into inactive thyroid hormone, which then slows down the metabolism. So actually the most anxious people who I've seen and stressed people I've seen, unless it's an acute situation, if it's a chronic situation, their heart rate is usually low, even in their 50s commonly, sometimes even high 40s, which is considered very low from a medical point of view. And unusual in most cases. But anyway, so it gets a bit complicated. However, generally, if your metabolism is high and if you're not going for excessive stress, the resting heart rate you're aiming for is mid 70s to mid 80s. That's a nice kind of level. And that's counter, what a lot of people have been taught. A lot of people think that the lower your heart rate is the better, But that's based on the same principles as I explained earlier of the lower your temperature, the better. The idea that you're a machine that has wear and tear, and so just like a car, we want to drive you slower because then you'll last longer. But of course, you're not a car, you're not a machine. You are an energy generating, living, breathing organism. And so, again, I won't repeat myself. But anyway, so that's where this idea comes from, that a low heart rate is good. My experience understanding, as I said earlier that the thinnest I was is the worst I've ever felt in my life. I'll also tell you the lowest my heart rate ever was the most anxious and worst I felt in my life. I remember at one point, like my heart rate got down to the 30s, 38 or something like that, which is considered a medical emergency. I did not go to the hospital because it was like late at night and it was a very temporary thing. But that was probably a case of what you talked about at the beginning, Chrissy, where it's like not knowing that probably would have been better for me because it just made me freak out even more. But yeah, so again, I know it's anecdotal, but I've seen this as well in other people, that low heart rate does not equal low stress necessarily. What I tend to find is what I just said, like 70s to 80s is the sweet spot. Over 100, if you're resting, sitting down, that probably is stress. But again, also very low, that often is stress as well. So yeah. So not as helpful for metabolism as temperature, but helpful along with temperature to measure metabolism. And if you are stressed and you're trying to calm yourself down, you could say looking at a heart rate monitor and seeing your heart rate is 110 or whatever it might be doesn't help because it's stressful. But I actually found it very helpful because it helped me to try things and see what worked to reduce it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try doing meditation for 20 minutes. Oh, I'm going to try L-theanine. I'm going to try phosphatidylserine. I'm going to try CBD. I'm going to try, this, that, or the other. And so I was able to look and see what effectively reduced my heart rate back to a, quote unquote normal level, and what was completely useless once you're stressed. Now, obviously, there's a difference between keeping yourself calm in the first place versus calming yourself down once you're stressed. But yeah, I found that quite useful. The other thing that these do is they measure specific oxygen. And so they don't do it like 100% reliably. So again, don't panic if it's low necessarily, but it is an indicator. And remember all the instructions I said before about don't look at the results straight away, give it a minute, make sure you've been sitting down for at least 5 minutes before you do it, all that kind of stuff. But it's measuring how saturated your red blood cells are with oxygen reasonably well. It's something that, again, they tend to put on you in a hospital in like an ICU because that oxygen saturation level going down is a good sign that you might be dying. It's like a serious issue if it gets low enough. And same with heart rate. They'll measure your heart rate for the same reason. If it goes up high enough or low high enough, then that can kill you. So if you're not going through a medical issue like that, it's not really for that reason, but it can indicate what's going on. And when we're talking about more continuous monitors, as we're going to be talking about in a bit, I'll talk more about specific oxygen because it can be very helpful, especially during nighttime, where that can be one of the things that disturbs people's sleep. If you're really struggling to breathe, if you can barely catch your breath, and you have one of these devices and it shows that your specific oxygen is low, it is a reason to call a doctor or to call, emergency or whatever the not quite emergency, but the thing before that is in your country, to let them know that and find out what's going on. As to how you treat that, that's a bit more debatable. I've talked about before how just forcing oxygen into the lungs with ventilators is not what I would do. And when it was being done in the early days of COVID, I thought this is a severe mistake, and I ended up being 100% right. I will say that if I've seen my specific oxygen going down, what I've actually tended to do is the exact opposite of what you think. I would actually hold my breath. And if you hold your breath, I find the specific oxygen goes right back up again. So that's a counterintuitive way to address it, which kind of leads me to the next thing on my list, actually. Another great way of measuring just your overall health, another biofeedback device is, again, just a stopwatch and your brain. And that's to measure how long you can hold your breath.
Yes, and we've done some episodes on that, so I'll put the links below. So, that's a great indicator of health overall, isn't it, Owen?
Yes, because generally, the less time you can hold your breath, the closer you are to dying, and the longer you can hold your breath, the more healthy you are. So this is something that was really discovered by a person called Buteyko, Dr. Buteyko in Russia, a long time ago. I'm not sure if it's 70, 80 years ago, something like that. He was monitoring a lot of people's blood oxygen levels, breathing capacity, how much they were breathing per minute. And he worked from anything from elite athletes and NASA, not NASA, but space program people, to people who were literally dying of lung diseases. And what he observed is that the people who could hold their breath the longest and the people who breathed the least were the fittest and healthiest, and the people who could hold their breath for the least amount of time and who were breathing the most were the closest to death. And they're literally monitoring it. Like, okay, if you're breathing 12 liters a minute, you're ill. If you're breathing 14, then you're even more ill. If you're breathing 16, and there will be some point where you're dead. There was a direct correlation. And so this is classic biofeedback thinking 101. He had this brainwave that it seems no one else had until now. And he said, okay, if the more someone breathes, the more sick they are and the closer they are to death, could we help them by getting them to breathe less? And that was the theory, and the claim is, but not just by him, but many practitioners and teachers underneath him ever since, that is exactly the case, that even people who are very, very seriously ill, if they breathe less, they can turn it around and all the rest of it. So I won't talk about all of that because that's, as you said, Chrissy, a whole other episode. We talked about it several times before. But just as a measure of biofeedback of how you're doing at the time, so the length of time you can hold your breath is really determined by your tolerance to CO2. Again, I won't explain all of that. Check the other episodes if you don't know what I'm talking about. But your tolerance of CO2 is kind of determined by a couple of things. One of them is by if you've eaten recently, it'll change it. So this is an experiment that you do on an empty stomach before you eat. So let's put that aside for a second. Assume you always do it before you eat. So the other main factor is your level of stress. So this is, first of all, if you do the test once, it's a good general biofeedback of how healthy you are. But the idea of biofeedback is more that you do it repeatedly to see, you get a reading and then you try and improve it. And so what you'll see is that the less stressed you are, and also the more you exercise in a healthy way, the more that you'll be able to hold your breath for longer, and you'll be able to tolerate more CO2, which shows in the fact that you can hold your breath for longer. So they have this thing called the control pause. A guy called Patrick McKean, who's also popularized it, he calls it the BOLT test, BOLT, body oxygen level test, either way. And so basically what it is you take a deep breath in, you don't push your breath out, but you just kind of let it fall out to a normal medium level, so there's still some air in there. And then you basically close your mouth, plug your nose, hold your breath, and you see how long you can do that for before you feel, not that you're dying, but before that, like a definite strong need to breathe. Having said that, as I said before in the episodes before, I think a lot of people really they really don't do this correctly. But let's assume that you are doing it correctly. I'll give you the measurements of what it means. If you can't hold your breath if the level you can hold your breath is 0 to 10 seconds, you are almost certainly already ill. If you can hold it for 10 to 20 seconds, you are borderline ill, if maybe ill. If you can hold your breath for 20 to 40 seconds, you are probably not ill, but still vulnerable. So meaning, only takes X amount of days of missed sleep or stress or, bad food or whatever, and you'll start to feel unwell. And if you can hold it, 40 to 60, you are strong. You probably have very high levels of resilience. And if you can hold it for 60, you are very strong. So that's what they teach. That's it in essence. And they had all kinds of belief, like if you hold it for more than 60, you're like superhuman and all this kind of crazy stuff, which I think is pushing it a bit. But it certainly means that your level of stress resilience is very high. It's significant. Proof of that, just colloquially, we've talked about this before, I think in a recent episode. If you're sitting next to someone and you can hear them breathing, like straining to breathe, like that's not something that you would associate with health. That's something you would associate with someone who's really unhealthy, which you'd be right to think that way. On the other hand, let's say you are jogging next to someone, and no, let's say you're jogging next to two people. One of them, like, is holding a conversation with you, completely out of breath. The other one is like, which do we think of as a healthy one, right? And you're maybe in between. It's the one who can easily talk, even while jogging or even while, I don't know, mildly sprinting and still hold a conversation without being out of breath. Why? Why do we see that as a sign of health? Because it is, right? So that's that idea. So this is something in terms of biofeedback, you can measure it regularly and you can be like, oh God, I haven't slept so well the last couple of nights. Has it impacted me? Oh, yes, it has. Because usually I'm 20 seconds and now I'm 15 or whatever it might be. Or, I'm taking all these supplements for a month now and they're supposed to be good at helping my stress. Let's see. Oh, my thing is exactly the same. So maybe there's other factors, but maybe the supplements just aren't working. It's another test you can do that's cheap or free. If you already own a stopwatch or a cell phone, which gives you very important data.
Absolutely. And again, as you've just said, it's a great indicator and can show you where, because this is changeable, it's adaptable. It's like, building muscle, you're building yourself up in a certain way, which you've gone through in the Buteyko episode and, teaching people how to do. So you can change this. You can increase your body's ability to, hold your breath and have that resistance or that CO2 tolerance, which over time can make a massive impact to your health.
Definitely. And just exercise is the simple one answer as to how you can increase it. But exercise, like if you go running, but the whole time you go, like there's limited benefit to it. So that's why I said exercising the right way. Even if you're walking, but you make sure to breathe through your nose, that's going to be good exercise to help to increase that carbon dioxide tolerance. Again, this is not a training on how to fix all these things, but you're going to link to it, Chrissy, in the description. By the way, always check out the description. I see, and I appreciate every comment, but I see way too many comments like, where's the link to this and all the rest of it. Always in the show notes, always in the description. It's always there. Just click on see more or something like that if it isn't immediately apparent, and you will see all the references. Sometimes like the studies and stuff I cite. All of that is always in the show notes. Okay, so I've done a couple there that are like not strictly understood, by mainstream medicine. And I started with something that is, mainstream medicine does agree of the about the scales and the tape measure thing. So let's get back to something that mainstream medicine is fully on board with, which is still accurate and helpful.
Yeah, and in the States, I don't know about you guys, I haven't really seen it crazily over here, but pretty much in every pharmacy in the States, there is one of these.
Yeah, a blood pressure cuff. Now, I've picked stuff that you could just do easily at home. And so, yes, you can go somewhere. But this is what I want to point out. You don't have to. You can get one of these. Is it as good as, like a really expensive machine? That's debatable. But it will give you an indication. It's good enough. I have... again, tested as I do and found that what this home device is very similar to what is being said by, at the doctor's office or with one of the, more expensive machines. So, blood pressure. Blood pressure is, again, I guess just like a lot of things we talked about so far, not a problem in and of itself, but it is an indicator of a problem in a significant way. And so if your blood pressure is both too high and too low, it is definitely a sign of a problem in different ways. Usually, though, what's focused on is the issue of the blood pressure being too high, because heart disease or cardiovascular disease is, usually the number one or number two killer, depending on what country you're in. And although blood tests are a great thing to do for early warning signs, as I've talked about before, a simpler thing you can do is measure blood pressure. And now, again, blood pressure is an indicator. So as I've talked about before, and I think recently in an episode I talked about, just like taking a drug to lower blood pressure doesn't really address the underlying problem. So it's like a problem causes the high blood pressure, and then the high blood pressure is a sign of a more serious problem to come. But it's not like lowering blood pressure in and of itself, like with a drug, is necessarily resolving that problem. But it's an indicator. And so some of the stuff that's recommended for high blood pressure, like, exercise, and maybe not overeating, things like that, and relaxation techniques as well, and all the usual, all of that stuff is good and is helpful. And so it's good to measure your blood pressure. It's good to do it regularly, especially as you get older. When I say regularly, yeah, not daily, but maybe every quarter or something like that. If it's high, don't assume that it's the end of the world and you're about to get a heart attack. Like we talked about near the beginning, these things can vary and be deceiving. So just try it again later. I want to give a couple of recommendations actually. So I've heard some, longevity experts and doctors talk about it, how most doctors do this incorrectly. You should be seated for at least 5 minutes before you have a blood pressure test done on you. Same thing I was saying earlier about the heart rate and the temperature and all the rest of it is true for this as well. So the idea that sometimes they take you in, they sit you down, they immediately start measuring your blood pressure is incorrect. Blood pressure will vary substantially between if you are standing and if you are sitting. And the measurement is supposed to be if you are sitting or lying down. And so you need to be sitting down for at least 5 minutes before you measure it. So don't be telling the doctor or the nurse how to do their job. I'm not telling you that for that reason. It's usually not worth it. But I'm saying you can just measure your own. And when you do your own, wait at least 5 minutes. Also, if you've just been, I don't know, screaming and shouting at the television because your favorite sports ball team is losing, that's also going to affect your blood pressure, right? So try and, be sensible about when you do it. I'm kind of picking a, extreme example, I guess, but even if you've just been spending the last 20 minutes worrying about how your Bitcoin position is doing or whatever, like it will affect it. So
No, but it's a very valid point. I mean, sometimes as well for me, when I go in to get my blood pressure, because I'm in the doctor's office, I'm already a little nervous, I'm already a little anxious, so it can tend to be a little bit high. And I know sometimes they'll do the best of 3, but it's a valid point to know, because it can instantly change.
And they do know about that point. They do talk about that, how just the fact of being at doctors will like up your points by like 10 or something like that. So yeah. So high blood pressure, everyone knows, I think these days, early risk of cardiovascular disease. What about low blood pressure? So low blood pressure can be a sign of, generally low adrenal function. It can be a sign of, anemia potentially, but generally it's not really worried about by the medical profession unless it's extreme anywhere near as much, because again, the chances of it developing into something life-threatening are way, way lower. The thing that would really reduce blood pressure that is life-threatening and serious immediately is like if there were internal bleeding. But there tend to be other signs of that which are obvious other than low blood pressure. But yeah, if you feel dizzy when you stand up, if you faint, all of that kind of thing. There's POTS, for instance. I know people in the comments have talked about having that before. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, I think. Basically, like when you stand up, your body's heart rate goes up too much, your blood pressure goes down. So there's kind of stuff like that as well. But yeah, again, it's potentially a problem, and so it's good to know that. I would actually say, from all the research I have done, that the dangers of high blood pressure are overblown, and that basically, just like with high heart rate, just like with high body temperature, you don't want it to be too high, but if it's at the top end of what they consider healthy, like 120/80, that kind of thing, that's good. I would say that's preferable compared to 90/60. You could argue that because you could say 90/60 is further away from being too high, which is a cardiovascular risk. But all other things being equal, if you are optimal on your lifestyle and all the rest of it, having a bit higher blood pressure, I personally see as more of a sign of health and vitality for those reasons. And again, I've seen when I was sick and unhealthy and really unwell, my blood pressure was lower. And it's not just me, I've seen it in other people as well. Often when they are really struggling, like I said, their heart rate is down, their temperature is down, and yes, their blood pressure is usually down as well. So too high is obviously not good, but like the high end of what's considered normal is usually optimal, is what I've seen.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. And also, as we've discussed in one of our last episodes, the top 10 meds about high blood pressure, and it's one of those things that it can potentially be something you're going to be on for the rest of your life, so it can help bring it down. By having testing your blood pressure before you get to that stage, there are things, lifestyle choices that you could potentially, implement and things like that, so that you can either delay or maybe not have to go on that medication at all.
Absolutely. It's really not hard to prevent, Admittedly, there are some medical conditions that are hard to predict and to prevent. I don't want to claim it's all so easy like some health teachers do, but I think it's acknowledged even in the mainstream that cardiovascular issues and blood glucose issues, which we'll get to next, are, very, very common and yet very, very easily preventable if treated early enough and with enough commitment. So yeah, let's get to blood sugar now, right?
So yes, let's kick it off. Elwin, talk to me about the continuous glucose monitor.
So before we go into that, let's just talk about testing blood sugar. So it's technically a blood test, so I said it's in a category that we won't be talking about today, but it's something you can do at home. It's something that many people do at home. You can get, a little machine, a little test kit, a little test strips, and this is something that up until now, diabetics have needed to do on an ongoing basis to calibrate how much insulin to take. But it's something that you can do too. And you don't have to go to a doctor. You don't have to pay for an expensive blood test when it comes to this. You can take a little finger prick thing, goes kind of click, and then one little blood you squeeze out, you put it in this microchip thing, the little thing counts down and it goes, your blood glucose is whatever. So this is super, super important for a few different reasons. I won't, go through the whole things. We talked about it recently. There's a recent episode on insulin resistance I recommend people check out. But, as concisely as possible, just like high blood pressure is one of the biggest predictor of early death, high blood glucose is also a huge predictor of early death. And both through the obvious way that if your blood glucose gets too high, then that's called type 2 diabetes, but also for the unobvious way, which is it's probably a sign of insulin resistance, which is a contributing factor to heart disease again, as well as a huge amount of other metabolic problems. So doing a test like that, occasionally at home, again, if you don't like doing blood tests, if you don't like going to the doctor, if you don't like getting the blood drawn, to do a test like that. With that, it's best to do it fasting, so first thing in the morning, because obviously what you eat and how much you've eaten and all the rest of it will influence that. But if you test that first thing in the morning, and even if it's in the normal range, but if it's in the high part of the normal range, you can consider whether that may be a sign of, an early sign of insulin resistance. I say that it's like, if insulin is the problem, why not test insulin? We've talked about this. Like, testing insulin costs a lot. It's difficult for the lab to do. Testing glucose is extremely easy, and you can do it yourself in your own home in the way that I've just described. But there is another way of testing, which you mentioned there, Chrissy, which some people just don't want to do. People are scared of blood. They don't want to stab themselves. I mean, it is painful for a few seconds, I understand. And also, it's only a snapshot. So the great thing, and so that's helpful, right? If it's like too high, you can start thinking about what you can do to lower it. But what is even more useful is knowing just how is it and what are the impacts of all these different foods and even activities on the level of my blood sugar, and how stable is my blood sugar? Because a lot of time, the most basic test that a doctor will do for blood sugar is just like a HbA1c or hemoglobin A1c. And what that indicates is kind of what the average blood sugar level has been over the last 3 months. And so that's helpful to know if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, because the average will be high in those cases. But it's not helpful at all to know how stable your blood sugar has been, which is a much more important issue earlier on, before you're pre-diabetic. So pre-diabetic, you just tend to see a lot of instability, a lot of wild swings. And those wild swings will correlate with a lot of other things that may be negatively impacting your life. Like when they're high, you might find that you find it hard to focus and you're kind of agitated or wired and stuff like that. And when it's low, you might find that you're sleepy or moody or cranky, all this kind of thing. So it's not really easy to think clearly in either state. It's only really possible to think clearly and rationally and reasonably if your blood sugar is kind of in the middle. So yeah, this pretty recent invention in terms of being available to the public of this continuous glucose monitor. I haven't used it, clients have, but I haven't. And so you just started, Chrissy, because you're not diabetic, you're not pre-diabetic, but you were like pre, right, with a few of your blood tests. So you decided to get into it. So tell us about it. What's involved? What do you have to do? Where do you get it? How much is it? How do you put it on? What does it tell you? Tell us the full thing.
Well, so being over here in the UK, this is one of the things I am able to just order it online and get it without a prescription. In the States, I'm not sure. There might be some companies that you can do that, but usually in the United States, you have to have a prescription. I don't know why that is exactly the case, but hopefully that's moving in another space, and maybe there may be some available. Usually one of them, and it attaches here. It's got a little, how do you say, like sticky bit, and it lasts for 2 weeks. It costs 50 pounds, just one. So I tend to buy a double pack so that I can, and I'll use it in between, and it lasts for 14 days. So it comes with a little device, and then you kind of punch it in, and there's a tiny little, it could be a little, little painful for a second, but then that's it. And the adhesive sticks to the back of the skin. It's pretty good with water too. Like, I've tried not to get it wet, but if I'm in the bath or something like that, keep it out. But if I go into it, it's okay. But what it does do, which is really nice, is like what you were talking about earlier. It's going to show those peaks and those valleys, or whether I'm steady. Your blood glucose, your blood sugar levels are going to go up and down throughout the day. But it's those high spikes and those low lows that you're talking about, that, it's that volatility. And so one of the things that I've been able to identify are certain foods that absolutely spike it, certain foods that I didn't think would, and then they do, times of day, as we've talked about before too. And in referencing one of the episodes, is about having that combination of fat, protein, and carb together. I know when I have a balanced meal like that, more so, then there's a lot less in the spikes. So it's been
I love that.
Yeah.
I love this, by the way, because I've been recommending this for a long, long time. Back when a lot of my recommendations from 10 years ago, I really don't stand by, but I have been preaching this for, 15 years now. It's not even that controversial. I'm certainly not saying I'm the only one, but it just seems like everyone I meet is always on some other kind of extreme something. And I love these continuous glucose monitors. I try and get every client to take them because I'm like, look, you might disagree with my theory as you see it. Maybe I'm wrong. Do this testing and find out. And there may be exceptions. I mean, in your case, Chrissy, obviously what I recommended is, as you've seen, it's accurate, and I think it generally will be for people. But there's always exceptions. So I don't think the moral of that was not to say, yeah, just trust me, I'm right. My moral was to say, like, I love that you can test it to see what does work and what doesn't work. So tell us about some of the foods. And again, before Chrissy says this, what works for her may not work for you and vice versa. That's the whole point, is the testing. But just out of interest, Chrissy, tell us what things have and haven't worked for you that you've seen. Or like, what's the impact of things? I guess that's a better way of saying it. Like, what spikes your blood sugar, like what doesn't?
Yeah, so just so you can see, this is my today. So I've been pretty even keeled because I've been really making sure that I'm eating balanced with my protein, fats, and carbs. So it's been really, really good. Let me come back to another day when I decided to just have some potato chips on their own, which was quite interesting. The other thing that you have to do, just because you'll see it's off, is you just have to keep the Bluetooth and sometimes tap in so that you'll have the continuous graph, which I didn't quite do that day because I think I was more focused on the potato chips. So I don't know if you can see how spikes, see that one dot all the way up, and it's just about to go from the green into the white. So if it'd gone above that green mark into the white, it's like, you don't want to go out of the range. But
the thing I noticed, Chris, is when you got it back in again, it was really low.
Yeah,
right?
So exactly. So as you can see, the dip, so it went super high and then it completely dropped. And so it totally crashed. Yeah.
And is it just eating potato chips, or is it the fact like you ate them and you hadn't eaten for hours and hours and hours before that, or is it because you overate, like you had a full meal and then the potato chips? What was the circumstance?
I just had them on their own. So I'd had my dinner much earlier. It was late at night and I was like, oh gosh, I just want a little something, and I didn't go to bed as early as I normally was. I was like, I'll go have some potato chips. Great. And then that happens. So you can see that. And there also have been things where I was eating a cereal bar on the go that I thought was a very healthy cereal bar, and I could see it really spiked me. I was like, I wouldn't have expected that. One of the other things that I've noticed that really makes a big impact, as we have discussed before in previous episodes, is making sure there's the breakfast at the right time, the lunch at the right time, and the dinner at the right time. If I don't do that, then I can see it starts to get a little bit like my blood sugar will drop more into that very, very low range. And then I can notice my mood changing. I'm a little bit more moody, anger or aggressive in that. And that's just upsetting. So that's where I've really got to make sure that I'm fueling myself correctly. And so that's really been something that's I've been able to see and identify too. And if I maintain a really good, sense throughout the day with my meals, then at night, I'm not seeing my body dip into the red zone because I've given myself enough fuel throughout the day, and therefore then I'm not going super low at night, which then could potentially wake me up. And, as I've said, I've had issues with that. So yeah, it's been a really good feedback machine. I know I'm looking to make the adjustments because, as I've said, there's been type 2 diabetes in my family. I know that's there. I can see and I don't want to go there. So this has been very, very supportive.
Amazing. And yeah, have you seen it in your sleep? Like, did you notice a correlation between it dropping and you waking up at night, or has that not happened since you had it?
No, I've seen it in the past, not so much this time of using it, but when I've noticed it in the past, I'm like, oh, actually, and it was more difficult for me to fall asleep. So when I'm really doing a lot more drops in the night, then I'm like awake for, longer periods. So that's what it's been like for me.
And have you noticed a difference overall between a day where it is, again, as you said, it's not supposed to be a straight line, it's supposed to go up and down a bit, but have you noticed a correlation between it being more of a steady correlation and just the quality of your day versus where it's more extremely up and down, or have you not had a chance to see that yet because you've been eating well in general?
Yeah, no, last week I was not so great, but this, because we went out a little bit more. So, the food it was just kind of here or there or longer, sometimes in between periods. But for these last 4 or 5 days, I've been steady and my mood has been more neutral. It's been more even keeled. And that feels good, because then I'm like, oh, actually, I'm really enjoying myself a little bit more. Last week was more stressed. So I could see that in other spaces. So it's all landing more and more. And so I'm even just saying, I just said to my husband the other day, I said, it's really important. See how we've been going the last couple of days. I need you to do this so that you'll have that. And
he's doing it as well?
Trying to. Well, when we're together, it's much easier, because I'll make the food, put it together, and be like, okay, we're eating now. This is what you're eating. And we're going together. But it's difficult because his job, he travels so much. So it's not so easy to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult when you travel. Okay, but yeah, it's helpful, right? Because again, if you're traveling, because you travel a lot as well, so I'll be interested to hear your report. How helpful it was in that case, because you can be so busy you kind of forget to eat, right? Yeah, I see it as well. Like I would say, and I don't have a machine for this, but the three things I think are most impactful on mood on an everyday level. Yeah, and of course it's people being annoying and traffic and whatever. It's the outside stuff, but fundamentally it's who you are inside and how you respond, which is the key. And there are lots of deeper causes of why things upset you, but I think most people will be surprised how often it is simply one of three things: lack of good quality sleep, low blood sugar, or constipation. I personally, not just me, for everyone who I talk to, you can boil it down to one of those three things. And not to boil it down meaning there's more to it, but that's such a determining factor that if you just address those three things, how do you just address them? Again, we've got whole trainings on that, but that's often all it is. And there may be other bigger, deeper, more difficult things to address, but don't even try and address them until you've addressed those basic things, because you just can't think clearly. You're probably overcome with emotion. Okay, Chrissy, I think we're out of time. And so we're going to have to leave the thing that we've been building towards our favorite biofeedback device for a future episode. And probably by the time we record that, we'll have thought of a couple of others, remembered a couple of others that we really like as well. So thank you for sharing your continuous glucose monitor experience. The only reason I haven't used it is because I really just don't have an issue with blood sugar, but I'm kind of keen to try it anyway, because I'm keen to try all of these things. It's always helpful information. As I said, I don't have a massive issue with it, but I do know that, I eat meals and don't snack. And I know when it's been, maybe 6 hours or whatever since I've had a meal, I definitely don't feel as good. My blood sugar is just dropping. I'm just hungry. And I feel better when I've eaten. And it's as simple as that. Thank you for watching. Please share, like and subscribe. Please leave a comment. I always answer all YouTube questions. I usually answer comments unless they really don't need an answer. I'm a bit behind at the moment, but I always answer them sooner or later. So that's the best way to get hold of me. Please support our sponsors. Our sponsors are currently my companies, but they are the only thing keeping this podcast going. We do, we get almost no money from YouTube or anything else. If you can, please subscribe to us on YouTube. There's a way of clicking, I think, the join button, and it's very, very, very low amount of money per month, but it would be fantastic if you enjoy this podcast to show your support and to help us to continue funding this and keep doing this. And any final thoughts, Chrissy?
Yeah, no, it's always, supporting the sponsors supports the podcast, and Elwin definitely puts a lot of time, effort, and energy and all of his resources and knowledge into it. And it's because he loves it and bringing it to you guys as well. And I'm always amazed. Yes, he's there in the comments. So please, if you do have those questions, we're here to support you in all ways that we possibly can. So no, it's been brilliant. Again, Elwin, thank you. I'm happy to share about the CGM because it does make a difference. And I believe that these biofeedback devices are helping us all get to the next level, because then that does put the power back in our hands. So exactly. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you. We'll see you in the comments, and take care, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above, and make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.